the woman who could remember every bend in the river, every hidden spring, and every underground stream in the San Jose Valley, stood at the edge of the dusty settlement in October of 1872, watching her father's coffin being lowered into the hard California earth. Grace Thompson had learned the water sources from him during 17 years of following his footsteps across every inch of their land, back when his mind was sharp and his surveying tools were the most trusted in the valley. Now she was 23, alone, and holding knowledge that could save or ruin every rancher, farmer, and cattleman trying to survive the drought that had turned the valley into a furnace. She did not cry at the funeral because she had no tears left after watching consumption take him piece by piece over the last 6 months. The preacher said words that meant nothing while dust devils spun in the distance, and the sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil. Most of the town had come, not out of love for Gerald Thompson, but out of respect for what he had known. Water was life in California, and her father had been the man who found it when wells ran dry and creeks disappeared into cracked earth. When the last shovel of dirt fell and people began drifting away with murmured condolences, Grace stood alone until only one man remained. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in shadow. His hat was worn but well-maintained, and his boots spoke of long days in the saddle. She had seen him around San Jose in recent weeks, one of the cowboys working for the massive Harrison ranch that sprawled across the northern portion of the valley. "Miss Thompson," he said, removing his hat. His voice was deep and carried a Texas drawl that marked him as someone who had traveled far to reach California. "My name is Cole Harrison. I wanted to pay my respects to your father. He helped my uncle find water for his cattle 3 years back when we first came to the valley. Saved the whole operation." Grace looked at him properly then, taking in the strong jaw and the weathered face of a man who had spent his life outdoors. He was perhaps 27 or 28, old enough to have seen hard times but young enough to still have hope in his eyes. "I remember," she said quietly, "the northwest pasture. He found the underground stream that feeds down from the mountain watershed." Cole's eyebrows rose slightly. "You were there." "I was always there," Grace replied. "My father believed someone should carry on his work. He had no sons, so he taught me everything. How to read the land, how to understand where water flows beneath the surface, how to recognize the signs that others miss." Something shifted in Cole's expression, a flicker of interest that went beyond mere politeness. "The drought has been hard on everyone. The Harrison Ranch is down to 3 working wells, and 2 of them are running shallow. My uncle is getting desperate, and he is not a man who shows desperation easily." Grace nodded slowly, understanding what he was really asking without him having to speak the words directly. "Water finds its own level, Mr. Harrison. Even in drought, it is there if you know where to look. Your uncle's land sits on ancient channels that ran strong before the Spanish came to California. The water has not disappeared. It has only gone deeper." "Could you find it?" Cole asked directly, his creek water eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made something flutter in her chest. "Could you do what your father did?" "I could," Grace said simply. "But I am a woman alone now, and there are men in this valley who do not believe a woman can read the land the way my father did. They think his knowledge died with him." Cole settled his hat back on his head, but his gaze never left her face. "My uncle is not one of those men. He cares about results, not about who delivers them. If you can find water for the Harrison Ranch, he will pay you the same as he would have paid your father. More, if you can find enough to see us through until the rains return." Grace felt the weight of her empty house pressing down on her, the bills her father had left unpaid during his illness, and the knowledge that no one in San Jose would hire a woman surveyor no matter how much she knew. "I will need to walk your land," she said. "Study the terrain, understand the flow patterns. It is not quick work." "How long?" Cole asked. "A week, perhaps 2, depending on the size of the area you need surveyed." "The ranch is 8,000 acres, Cole said. "But the critical areas for cattle are maybe 2,000. We need reliable water sources that will not fail even if this drought continues through next summer." Grace considered this, her mind already mapping what she knew of the Harrison Ranch boundaries from her father's old surveys. "I can do it. I will need access to ride across the property freely, and I will need someone to show me the current well locations and the places where water used to flow before the drought." "I can do that," Cole offered immediately. "I have been managing the cattle operations for my uncle since spring. I know every dry creek bed and failed spring on the property." "Then we have an arrangement," Grace said, extending her hand the way her father had taught her to seal a business deal. Cole took her hand, and his grip was firm and warm, calloused from rope work and long days of labor. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through Grace's arm, a sensation she had never experienced in any of the few times she had shaken hands with men during her father's business dealings. Cole seemed to feel it too because his hand lingered a moment longer than strictly necessary before he released her fingers. "I will come to your house tomorrow morning," he said. "Bring a good horse if you have one. The terrain can be rough in places." "I have my father's gelding," Grace replied. "He is steady and sure-footed." Cole nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Thompson, I meant what I said about my uncle paying you fairly. But more than that, I hope you know that some of us do not care whether knowledge comes from a man or a woman. What matters is whether it is true." He left before she could respond, striding away through the cemetery with the confident gait of a man who knew his own worth. Grace watched him go, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. She had spent so many years as her father's assistant, always in the background, that she had never really considered herself as a woman men might notice. There had been no time for courtship or romance when every day was spent learning the secrets of the land. Now, standing alone in the cemetery with dust on her black dress and the future uncertain before her, she wondered what it might be like to have a man like Cole Harrison look at her not just with professional respect, but with something deeper. The next morning arrived with the same relentless sun and cloudless sky that had characterized every dawn for the past 18 months. Grace dressed in practical clothes, a split riding skirt and a sturdy blouse, with her father's old survey maps rolled and tied to her saddle. She had spent half the night going through his notes, refreshing her memory of the underground water patterns in the northern valley. Her father had been meticulous in his documentation, and she had helped him create many of the maps herself, but she had also discovered that her own memory was more detailed than any paper record. She could close her eyes and see the valley as if from a bird's perspective, every watershed and aquifer traced in her mind like veins beneath skin. Cole arrived exactly when he had promised, riding a tall roan horse that spoke of good breeding and better care. He had 2 canteens hanging from his saddle and a rifle in its scabbard, standard equipment for riding the open range. "Morning, Miss Thompson," he greeted her. "You ready to show me what you can do?" "I am ready to show you where the water is," Grace corrected gently as she mounted her father's steady gelding. "What I do is simply remember what the land has already told me." They rode north out of San Jose, following the main road for a few miles before cutting west toward the Harrison Ranch boundaries. The valley spread around them in shades of brown and gold, the grass dried to tinder, and the oak trees showing the stress of 2 years without adequate rain. In the distance, the mountains rose blue and hazy, their snowpack long since melted away. "Tell me what you see," Cole said as they rode side by side. Grace glanced at him, surprised by the question. Most men would have been explaining the land to her, assuming their knowledge was superior. "I see a valley floor that was once a lake bed thousands of years ago," she said slowly. "The soil composition changes as you move north, becoming more gravelly. That tells me there were ancient rivers here, flowing down from those mountains. Rivers carve channels, and those channels remain even when the surface water disappears. Underground, the water still follows those old paths." Cole listened intently, his eyes scanning the landscape as if trying to see what she saw. "My uncle has been digging wells where the land looks greenest, thinking that means water is close to the surface." "That is often true," Grace acknowledged. "But in a drought this severe, you cannot trust surface indicators. The trees with the deepest roots survive while the shallow-rooted plants die. You need to look at which oaks are still healthy, which direction their canopies lean. Trees know where water is better than men do." They reached the Harrison Ranch by mid-morning, passing under an impressive wooden gate with the brand burned deep into the crossbeam. The main house was a sprawling structure of adobe and timber, built to withstand both the summer heat and the winter rains. Corrals and outbuildings spread around it, and in the distance, Grace could see cattle clustered around what must be one of the remaining wells. Cole led her past the main house toward the working areas of the ranch. Several cowboys looked up from their tasks, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical when they saw Grace. She was accustomed to those looks and ignored them, focusing instead on the land itself. "The main well is there," Cole said, pointing to a stone structure near the barn. "It has been reliable for 3 years, but the water level has dropped by 6 feet in the last 2 months. The cattle well to the east is almost dry. We had a third well to the west, but it failed completely in August." Grace dismounted and walked slowly around the main well, not looking at the water itself but at the ground surrounding it, the slope of the land, the direction of the natural drainage. She pulled out a small notebook from her pocket and began sketching, her hands moving with practiced confidence. "The well to the west," she said without looking up. "How deep was it drilled?" 30 feet, Cole answered, coming to stand beside her. He smelled of leather and sage, and Grace found herself acutely aware of his presence. "Too shallow," she said definitively. "Whoever drilled, it followed surface water, not the deep channels. In normal years, it would have been adequate, but you need to drill deeper and about 200 yards northwest of the failed well. There is a channel there that runs at 45 feet. It feeds from the mountain watershed and should remain consistent even in drought." Cole's eyebrows rose. "You can tell that just from looking at the ground." "I can tell that from knowing how water moves through this valley," Grace replied. She straightened and met his gaze. "My father surveyed this area 5 years ago when your uncle first purchased the land. I was with him. We mapped not just the surface features but the underground structure. I remember every notation he made, every measurement we took. The channel is there, Mr. Harrison. I would stake my reputation on it." "Your reputation is exactly what you are staking," Cole pointed out, but there was no mockery in his tone. "If we drill where you say and find nothing, word will spread that Gerald Thompson's daughter does not have her father's gift. Then you had better make sure your drillers go to the exact spot I indicate," Grace said with a small smile. "And that they drill deep enough. Many men give up at 30 or 35 feet, thinking there is nothing below. But the real aquifers in this valley run between 40 and 60 feet in most places." Cole studied her for a long moment, and Grace had the uncomfortable sensation of being truly seen, as if he were looking past her practical clothes and weathered hands to something deeper. "You really do know this land," he said quietly. "I can hear it in your voice. This is not guesswork or book learning. You understand this valley the way a musician understands a melody." The comparison surprised her, and she felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "My father used to say that water sings if you know how to listen. The sound changes depending on depth and volume. Underground streams make the earth resonate differently than standing pools." "Will you teach me?" Cole asked suddenly. "I do not expect to learn in a day what took you years, but I would like to understand even a fraction of what you know. This is my home now. My uncle plans to leave the ranch to me when he is gone. I want to be able to protect it, to know where to find water when I need it." Grace was taken aback by the earnestness in his request. Men rarely asked her to teach them anything, assuming they already knew better. "I can show you what to look for," she said carefully. "But this kind of knowledge comes from walking the land season after season, seeing how it changes, understanding its patterns. It cannot be learned in a few weeks." "Then I will spend more than a few weeks learning," Cole said simply. "I am a patient man when the goal is worthwhile." Something in the way he said it made Grace think he was talking about more than just learning to find water, but she pushed that thought aside. She was here to do a job, to earn money she desperately needed, not to entertain romantic notions about a handsome cowboy who probably had a dozen girls in San Jose hoping to catch his eye. Over the next 2 weeks, Grace rode every corner of the Harrison Ranch with Cole as her constant companion. She showed him how to read the plants, how to recognize the subtle depressions that indicated old watercourses, how to feel the difference in the soil where moisture lingered deep below. He proved to be an excellent student, asking intelligent questions and remembering everything she told him. More than that, he treated her as an equal, never dismissing her observations or suggestions, always listening carefully before offering his own thoughts. They fell into an easy rhythm, starting early each morning to avoid the worst heat, stopping at midday to rest the horses and eat the lunch Cole always brought in his saddlebags. He shared his food without ceremony, and Grace found herself looking forward to those quiet breaks almost as much as the work itself. They talked about everything during those hours, not just water and ranching but their lives and dreams. Grace learned that Cole had grown up in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers, and had come west with his uncle after his parents died of fever. He had been 19 then, grieving and lost, and his uncle had given him purpose by teaching him the cattle business. Now, at 28, he was ready to build something of his own, to put down roots in California soil. Cole learned that Grace had grown up knowing she was different from other girls in San Jose, more interested in her father's work than in sewing or social calls. She had taught herself to read at 4 by studying her father's survey maps, and by 10 she could calculate water flow rates in her head. Other children had found her strange, and she had learned to be comfortable with solitude. "That must have been lonely," Cole said one afternoon as they sat in the shade of an ancient oak on the eastern boundary of the ranch. "Sometimes," Grace admitted, "but I had the land. I always felt like it was speaking to me in a language no one else could hear. That made me feel less alone." "I understand that," Cole said quietly. "After my parents died, I spent a year barely speaking to anyone. The cattle and the horses were easier to be around than people. They did not expect me to be over my grief before I was ready." Grace turned to look at him, seeing the shadow of old pain in his eyes. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his hand where it rested on his knee. "I am sorry you lost them so young." Cole turned his hand over, capturing her fingers in his. "I am sorry you just lost your father. I know what that emptiness feels like, how it sits in your chest like a stone." They sat like that for several heartbeats, hands clasped, both recognizing the shared experience of grief and the unexpected comfort of being understood. Then Cole squeezed her fingers gently and released them, clearing his throat. "Show me again how you can tell the depth of the water table from the root structure of these oaks." Grace showed him, grateful for the return to safer ground, even as part of her mourned the loss of his touch. She was falling for this man, she realized with a start. Somewhere between the first morning ride and this sun-drenched afternoon, Cole Harrison had worked his way into her heart with his patience, his kindness, and his genuine respect for her knowledge. By the end of the second week, Grace had completed her survey of the entire ranch. She had identified 7 prime locations for new wells, mapped 3 underground streams that could be tapped with proper drilling, and created a detailed chart of the entire water system beneath the Harrison property. She presented her findings to Cole and his uncle in the ranch house office, spreading her hand-drawn maps across the desk with confidence. Marcus Harrison was a gruff man in his 60s with shrewd eyes and a reputation for hard dealing, but he listened to Grace's presentation without interruption. When she finished, he studied the maps for a long moment before looking up at her. "This is remarkable work, Miss Thompson. Cole told me you had your father's gift, but this goes beyond anything Gerald ever provided for us. You have mapped the entire underground structure of my ranch." "Yes, sir," Grace said simply. "If you drill where I have indicated and to the depth specified, you should have reliable water sources for years to come, even if the drought continues." "And if we drill and find nothing?" Marcus asked bluntly. "Then I will return your payment and accept that I was wrong," Grace replied steadily. "But I am not wrong, Mr. Harrison. The water is there. I have staked everything I have left on this survey. I would not do that if I were not absolutely certain." Marcus exchanged a glance with Cole, who nodded slightly. "Very well," the older man said. "I will have my drilling crew start on the northwest location you identified first. That is where we need water most urgently for the winter pasture. You will stay on as consultant until we know whether your survey is accurate." "I will stay as long as you need me," Grace agreed. "Good. Cole will see that you are compensated for your time. And Miss Thompson, if this works out as you say, I will make sure every rancher in this valley knows that Gerald Thompson's daughter is the finest water surveyor in California." Grace felt a surge of gratitude and vindication. This was what her father had wanted for her, to be recognized for her knowledge rather than dismissed because of her sex. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I will not disappoint you." The drilling began 3 days later at the site Grace had marked northwest of the failed well. She was there every day, watching the progress, checking the drill depth, and waiting with her heart in her throat for the moment of truth. Cole stayed with her, his confidence in her never wavering even as the drill went down 30 feet, then 35, then 40 feet with no sign of water. The drilling crew started muttering doubts at 42 feet. The foreman, a grizzled man named Dutch, approached Cole with concerns. "We are burning through equipment and time," he said bluntly. "If there is nothing here, we need to stop before we waste more resources." "We go to 45 feet, Cole said firmly. "That is what Miss Thompson specified, and that is what we are going to do." Dutch looked skeptical but returned to work. Grace stood beside Cole, her hands clenched at her sides. "Thank you for believing in me," she said quietly. "I do not just believe in you," Cole replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I trust you completely, and not just about water, Grace." Before she could respond to that weighted statement, a shout went up from the drilling site. Water was gushing from the borehole, clear and cold and abundant. The crew stood back, shocked and delighted as the flow continued strong and steady. Dutch came over to Grace, removing his hat. "Miss Thompson, I owe you an apology. In 30 years of drilling, I have never seen anyone call a water source that precisely. You said 45 feet, and that is exactly where we hit the aquifer." Grace could barely speak past the relief flooding through her. "The land tells us where the water is," she managed. "We just have to listen." Cole was grinning, his whole face transformed with joy. Without warning, he swept Grace up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure happiness. "You did it. By God, Grace, you did it." Grace found herself laughing too, caught up in his enthusiasm and the overwhelming relief of vindication. When he set her down, they were standing very close, his hands still on her waist and her palms resting on his chest. The laughter faded as they looked at each other, the air between them suddenly charged with unspoken feelings. "Grace," Cole said softly, his creek water eyes searching her face, "I need to tell you something. Over these past weeks, working with you, learning from you, I have come to care for you deeply. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and it has nothing to do with your knowledge of water and everything to do with who you are. You are strong and brilliant and kind, and I find myself thinking about you every moment we are apart." Grace's heart was racing so fast she thought it might burst. "Cole, I have been thinking about you too, more than I should probably, but I am not like other women. I cannot simply give up my work to become a rancher's wife. This knowledge, this connection to the land, it is part of who I am." "I know that," Cole said, his thumbs stroking gentle circles on her waist through the fabric of her blouse. "I would never ask you to give up who you are. The world needs what you know, Grace. This valley needs you. And I need you, not as someone to keep my house or raise my children, though I hope you might want those things someday too. I need you as my partner, my equal, someone who understands the land as deeply as I am learning to. Someone who makes me want to be better, to know more, to build something that lasts." "That is a beautiful thing to say," Grace whispered, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. "But what will people think? A woman surveyor married to a rancher. It is not conventional." "To hell with conventional," Cole said fiercely. "I have watched you work miracles with nothing but your memory and your understanding of how water moves through the earth. I have seen you face down skeptics and prove them wrong with grace and dignity. If people want to gossip about us, let them. I would rather have a life with you, unconventional as it might be, than a proper conventional life with anyone else." Grace felt something break open in her chest, all the walls she had built around her heart crumbling under the intensity of his words and the sincerity in his eyes. "I love you," she said, the words escaping before she could question them. "I think I started falling in love with you the day of my father's funeral when you asked me about water instead of offering empty condolences." Cole's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I love you too, Grace Thompson. I think I knew at the moment you described the valley as a melody. You see beauty where others only see dirt and rock, and that is a rare and precious gift." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. The drilling crew cheered in the background, but Grace barely heard them. All she knew was the warmth of Cole's lips on hers, the strength of his arms around her, and the absolute certainty that this was right. This was what her father would have wanted for her, not to give up her knowledge but to find someone who valued it as much as he had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole kept her close. "Marry me," he said. "Not because it is conventional or expected, but because I cannot imagine building my future without you in it. Be my partner in every sense of the word. Help me make this ranch thrive. Teach me everything you know. Let me stand beside you as you become the finest surveyor in California." "Yes," Grace said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Cole Harrison. I will be your partner and your wife and the keeper of this valley's water secrets. And you will be my home, the place where I finally belong." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in San Jose, with Marcus Harrison beaming proudly and half the valley in attendance. Grace wore a simple dress of cream silk, her dark hair crowned with wildflowers that Cole had picked himself that morning. She carried no bouquet, instead holding a small glass vial of water from the well they had found together, a symbol of how their love had grown from shared purpose and mutual respect. The ceremony was brief and heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her with such tenderness that several of the older women in the congregation sighed audibly. They walked back down the aisle together, not as surveyor and rancher, but as partners embarking on a shared journey. The reception was held at the Harrison Ranch, with tables laden with food and a band playing cheerful music. Grace danced with Cole under the California stars, his arms strong around her waist and his eyes never leaving her face. "Are you happy?" he asked as they swayed to a slow waltz. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Grace replied honestly. "I have spent so much of my life alone, Cole. I never realized how much I was missing until I found you." "You were never truly alone," Cole said softly. "The land was always with you, but I am glad you are letting me share that connection now. You have taught me to see this valley the way you do, as a living thing with its own rhythms and secrets. It has changed how I think about ranching, about life itself." Over the next year, Grace and Cole built a life that defied every convention of the 1870s California frontier. Marcus formally made Cole a partner in the Harrison Ranch and insisted that Grace be named as well, recognizing that her knowledge was essential to the ranch's success. The 7 wells she had mapped were all drilled, and every single one produced abundant water exactly as she had predicted. Word of her accuracy spread throughout the valley, and soon Grace found herself receiving requests from ranchers, farmers, and even the county government for water surveys. She accepted the commissions that interested her, always with Cole at her side. They rode together across the valley, mapping water sources and teaching others how to recognize the signs of underground streams. Grace never revealed all her secrets, the deep intuitive knowledge that came from years of walking the land with her father. But she shared enough to help struggling farmers find water for their crops and ranchers save their cattle from drought. Their partnership extended beyond work into every aspect of their life together. Cole learned to value Grace's insights on ranch management, often seeking her opinion on cattle rotation and pasture management based on her understanding of the water cycle. Grace learned to appreciate Cole's practical wisdom and his gift for working with people, complementing her more solitary nature. They were 2 halves of a whole, each strengthening the other. The drought finally broke in the spring of 1874 with rains that lasted for 2 glorious weeks and turned the valley green again. Grace stood on the porch of the house that Cole had built for her on a rise overlooking the ranch, watching the water pour from the sky and feeling her father's spirit at peace. The wells they had drilled remained strong, supplementing the natural water sources and ensuring that the Harrison Ranch would thrive no matter what future droughts might come. "Penny for your thoughts," Cole said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. His hands came to rest on the gentle swell of her belly where their first child grew. "I was thinking about my father," Grace said, leaning back against his chest. "How proud he would be to see what we have built here, not just the ranch, but this life. A partnership based on respect and love and shared purpose. He raised an extraordinary daughter," Cole said, pressing a kiss to her temple. I wish I could thank him for that, for teaching you everything he knew and for believing that a woman could carry on his legacy. You honor him every day by believing in me the way he did, Grace replied, turning in his arms to face him. Not every man would have the confidence to stand beside a wife whose knowledge exceeds his own in some areas. Your knowledge does not threaten me, Grace. It amazes me. Every day I learn something new from you, and every day I fall more in love with the brilliant mind behind those beautiful eyes. Cole cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks gently. You are going to be an incredible mother, you know. Our child will grow up understanding this land the way you do, learning to listen to what it has to say. Our children, Grace corrected with a smile. I have a feeling this is just the beginning. The Harrison family is going to grow, and every one of our children will know the secrets of water and the value of knowledge freely shared. Their son was born in November of 1874, a healthy baby boy with his father's creek water eyes and a set of lungs that proclaimed his presence to the entire valley. They named him Gerald after Grace's father, and from the moment Cole held his son for the first time, he was utterly devoted. He proved to be as tender a father as he was a husband, walking the floor with Gerald during colicky nights and insisting on changing nappies, despite the raised eyebrows of other ranchers. Grace recovered quickly from childbirth, her body strong from years of riding and walking the land. Within a month, she was back to consulting work, often with baby Gerald strapped to her chest in a sling as she and Cole surveyed properties throughout the valley. The sight of the notorious water-finding woman riding with an infant became familiar, and soon other women began to take heart that perhaps motherhood and meaningful work were not mutually exclusive. The Harrison Ranch prospered beyond Marcus's wildest dreams. The reliable water sources Grace had mapped allowed them to expand their cattle operation and even begin growing hay and grain for sale. Marcus, who had been uncertain about retiring, found in Grace a worthy successor to his life's work. He taught her the business side of ranching, the complex negotiations and financial management that complemented her understanding of the land itself. By 1876, when Marcus Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68, Grace and Cole were fully prepared to take over the ranch. Marcus left everything to Cole, but with explicit language in his will praising Grace's contributions and acknowledging that without her water surveys, the ranch would have failed during the drought. It was an unprecedented move, and one that cemented Grace's reputation as more than just a surveyor, but as a true force in the valley's agricultural success. Their second child, a daughter they named Catherine after Cole's mother, was born in the spring of 1877. She had Grace's dark hair and determination, evident from the moment she learned to crawl and immediately set about exploring every corner of the house. Gerald, now 2.5, was fascinated by his little sister and appointed himself her protector, a role he took with utmost seriousness. Grace balanced motherhood with her surveying work, finding that the two parts of her life enriched each other. Teaching her children about the land gave her new perspectives on how to explain concepts to others. Cole was always there to support her, whether that meant taking care of both children while she completed a difficult survey or riding out with her and turning their work into family adventures. The valley continued to change around them as California grew and developed. The railroad came through San Jose in 1878, bringing new settlers and new opportunities. Some worried that the influx of people would strain the water resources, but Grace had already begun creating comprehensive maps of the entire valley's underground water system, working with the county to ensure sustainable management of this precious resource. In 1879, Grace was invited to present her findings at a water management conference in Sacramento, the state capital. It was unprecedented for a woman to speak at such a gathering, and many of the male engineers and surveyors in attendance arrived prepared to dismiss her as a novelty. Cole accompanied her, along with 3-year-old Gerald and 2-year-old Catherine, and sat in the front row with quiet pride as his wife took the stage. Grace began by acknowledging the skepticism in the room. "Gentlemen," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "I know many of you question whether a woman can truly understand the complex science of underground water systems. I am not here to argue about whether I should have been taught what I know. I am here to show you that I do know it, and that this knowledge can save lives, preserve agriculture, and build a sustainable future for California." She proceeded to present her maps of the San Jose Valley, explaining in precise technical language exactly how she had located each aquifer, predicted each flow rate, and calculated the sustainable extraction rates that would preserve the water table for future generations. She used mathematics and geological principles that impressed even the most skeptical engineers. But more than that, she spoke about the land itself as a living system, about understanding water not just as a resource to be exploited, but as part of a larger ecological balance. By the end of her presentation, the room was silent. Then one engineer stood and began to applaud, followed by another, and then the entire hall was on its feet. Grace stood at the podium, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright, and allowed herself a moment of pure triumph. Her father had dreamed of her receiving recognition like this, and now it was happening. The conference organizers invited her to consult on water projects throughout California, offers that would have made her one of the most sought-after surveyors in the state. Grace accepted some of the work, but turned down anything that would take her away from her family for extended periods. Cole assured her that he could manage the ranch and the children alone, but Grace had no desire to miss watching Gerald and Catherine grow up. She had found the balance she wanted, meaningful work combined with deep family connections. Their third child, another son they named Thomas after Cole's eldest brother, was born in 1880. He was a quiet, contemplative baby who seemed to absorb everything around him with wide, watchful eyes. Gerald and Catherine adored him, and the Harrison household rang with the sounds of children's laughter and endless questions about everything from cattle breeding to cloud formations. Grace continued to teach her children about the land, taking them on walks through the valley and showing them how to read the signs of water. Gerald proved to have inherited her intuitive understanding, able to point out likely water sources by the time he was 5. Catherine was more interested in the ranching side, following Cole around and learning everything about cattle and horses. Thomas, as he grew, showed a fascination with the scientific aspects, wanting to know not just where water was, but why it flowed in certain patterns. The valley prospered through the 1880s, and the Harrison Ranch became known as a model of sustainable agriculture. Grace's water management principles were adopted by more and more ranchers and farmers, ensuring that even in dry years, the valley had sufficient resources for everyone. She published a book in 1883, a comprehensive guide to water surveying in California that became required reading for agricultural students throughout the state. Cole, for his part, became one of the most respected ranchers in California, known for his innovative approaches and his willingness to adopt new methods. But he never failed to credit Grace as his partner in every success, always introducing her as his equal and often deferring to her expertise in matters of land management. Their marriage remained strong and passionate, built on the foundation of mutual respect and genuine friendship that had characterized it from the beginning. In 1885, when Gerald was 10, Catherine 8, and Thomas 5, Grace made a discovery that would become the crowning achievement of her career. While surveying the eastern edge of the valley for a potential new settlement, she identified an enormous underground reservoir, an ancient aquifer that had remained untapped throughout all the years of development. It was deep, nearly 80 feet below the surface, but the volume of water it contained was staggering. She spent months confirming her findings, drilling test wells and conducting geological surveys with a team of engineers who had learned to trust her instincts. When she finally presented her discovery to the county government, the implications were clear. The San Jose Valley had enough water to support growth and agriculture for generations to come, provided the resource was managed wisely. The county named the aquifer the Thompson Reserve in honor of her father, but everyone in the valley knew it was Grace who had found it. A celebration was held in San Jose, with Grace as the guest of honor. She stood on the same platform where her father had once been recognized for his work, and this time it was her name being praised, her knowledge being celebrated. Cole stood in the crowd with their 3 children, his heart so full of pride he thought it might burst. When Grace finished her speech and stepped down from the platform, Gerald, Catherine, and Thomas rushed to hug her, all talking at once about how proud they were of their mother. Cole waited until the children had their moment, then pulled Grace into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, not caring who was watching. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I loved you the first time you told me about ancient river channels, and I love you even more now watching you change the future of this entire valley." "I could not have done any of this without you," Grace replied, her eyes shining with emotion. "You believed in me when others doubted. You stood beside me when others would have expected me to walk behind. You made me brave enough to be fully myself." "You were always brave," Cole corrected. "I just made sure you knew I was there to catch you if you stumbled, though you never have, not once in all these years." As their children grew older, they each found their own paths while remaining rooted in the Harrison Ranch. Gerald, true to his inheritance, became a surveyor like his mother, working alongside Grace until he eventually took over most of her consulting work when she decided to focus on research and writing. He married a schoolteacher from San Jose, a brilliant woman who shared his love of the land, and they gave Grace and Cole their first grandchildren in 1895. Catherine surprised everyone by becoming a veterinarian, one of the first women in California to pursue that profession. She studied at the University of California and returned to the valley to establish a practice that served ranchers throughout the region. Her deep understanding of animals, learned from years on the Harrison Ranch, combined with rigorous scientific training, made her invaluable to the agricultural community. Thomas followed his fascination with science to become a hydrologist, studying water systems at a level of technical sophistication that even Grace had never achieved. He worked for the state government, developing policies for water conservation and management that were based on his mother's principles, but expanded with cutting-edge scientific knowledge. Through all of this, Grace and Cole remained the heart of the Harrison Ranch and the center of their growing family. They aged gracefully together, their hair silvering but their love never diminishing. Cole still called Grace the most remarkable woman he had ever met, and Grace still looked at him with the same wonder she had felt the first time he had asked her to teach him about water. In 1900, when Grace was 51 and Cole was 56, they stood together on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. The land spread before them, green and thriving, dotted with cattle and crisscrossed by the roads and fences that marked human settlement. But beneath it all, Grace could still feel the ancient patterns of water flowing through the earth, the secret rivers and hidden springs that made life possible in this beautiful place. "You ever regret it?" Cole asked, his arm around her waist in the familiar, comfortable embrace of long marriage. "Walking away from some of the bigger opportunities you were offered. You could have been surveying for the federal government, working on projects across the entire West." "Never," Grace said without hesitation. "I found everything I needed right here in this valley. My work, my family, and most importantly, you. What good would it have done me to map every water source in the West if I had lost what mattered most?" "We built something good here," Cole said, looking out at the ranch that had been his uncle's dream and had become their shared legacy. "Not just the ranch itself, but a life built on respect and partnership. I hope Gerald and Catherine and Thomas can find that kind of happiness in their own lives." "They will," Grace said confidently. "We taught them what really matters, not convention or what society expects, but genuine connection and shared purpose. We showed them that love grows strongest when two people build something together rather than one person giving up their dreams for the other." Cole turned to face her, cupping her face in his weathered hands the same way he had done on their wedding day nearly 25 years earlier. "Grace Thompson Harrison, you are the love of my life, the mother of my children, and the finest partner any man could ask for. Every day with you has been an adventure, and I look forward to whatever adventures still lie ahead." Grace kissed him, slow and sweet, filled with the accumulated tenderness of decades spent side by side. "Every water source I ever mapped," she said softly, "every well I ever found was just practice for finding you. You were the most precious discovery of my life, Cole Harrison." They stood together as the sun dipped below the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The valley settled into evening quiet, the cattle lowing gently in the distance, and the sound of Gerald's children playing near the main house carrying on the breeze. Inside their home, the maps Grace had drawn over the years hung on the walls, testimonies to a life spent understanding and protecting the water that made the valley thrive. As they turned to go inside, Cole paused. "You know, I never told you exactly what I thought that first day when you explained about the ancient river channels. What did you think?" Grace asked curiously. "I thought, this woman's knowledge is worth gold, but then I got to know you and I realized I was wrong. Your knowledge is valuable, yes, but you, Grace, you are worth infinitely more than gold. You are worth everything." Grace felt tears prick her eyes, moved by the sincerity in his voice even after all these years. "You told me that day that what I knew was worth gold. Do you remember?" "I remember every word of every conversation we have ever had," Cole replied. "But especially that one, because it was the beginning of the rest of my life." They went inside together, closing the door on the night but not on the memories of how a cowboy and a water surveyor had found each other in a drought-stricken valley and built a love story as enduring as the land itself. The work Grace had started continued through her children and would continue through their children after them, preserving the water resources of the San Jose Valley for generations yet unborn. The years continued to unfold with the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. Grace and Cole celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1904, with all their children and grandchildren gathered around them. By then, they had 6 grandchildren, with more on the way, and the Harrison Ranch had expanded to include adjacent properties purchased by Thomas and Gerald to continue the family legacy. Grace still consulted on major water projects, though she had cut back significantly on the physical demands of surveying. Instead, she focused on teaching the next generation, not just her own children and grandchildren, but young surveyors from across California who came to learn from the legendary woman who had mapped the San Jose Valley from memory. She never charged for her teaching, believing that knowledge about water was too important to hoard. The more people who understood how to find and preserve water resources, the better chance California had of sustainable development. Cole remained active in ranch management well into his 60s, though he increasingly turned over the day-to-day operations to Gerald and Catherine, who had returned to the ranch with her veterinary practice. He and Grace took more time for themselves, riding out together into the valley just as they had done in the early days of their marriage, though now they rode more slowly and stopped more frequently to rest. On one such ride in the spring of 1906, they visited the site of the first well Grace had found for the Harrison Ranch, the one that had proven her abilities and changed both their lives. The well still flowed strong, a testament to the accuracy of her survey 34 years earlier. They dismounted and sat in the shade of a cottonwood that had grown tall on the abundant water. "I come here sometimes," Cole admitted, "when I need to think clearly about something. This spot always reminds me of the day I knew for certain that you were going to be part of my life forever. Watching that water burst from the ground, seeing your face light up with relief and joy, I knew I wanted to spend every remaining day making you that happy." "You have succeeded beyond measure," Grace said, lacing her fingers through his. "I never dreamed I could have this life, Cole. A career that fulfilled me, a family that brought me joy, and a partner who never once made me choose between the two. You gave me the freedom to be fully myself." "You always were fully yourself," Cole corrected gently. "I just made sure you knew that was not only acceptable but beautiful." "Grace, you changed the way I see the world. Before I met you, I thought I understood the land because I could ride across it and work it. But you taught me that true understanding goes deeper. You taught me to listen." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow from the well and listening to the sounds of the valley around them. After all these years, Grace could still hear what her father had called the song of water, that subtle vibration in the earth that spoke of hidden streams and ancient aquifers. But now that song was intertwined with memories of Cole, of their children, of a life built together on this land they both loved. As the sun began to set, they mounted their horses and rode slowly back toward home. The ranch spread before them, thriving and beautiful, a testament to the partnership that had sustained it. When they reached the house, their grandchildren came running to greet them, full of stories about their day and questions about everything from why birds migrated to how deep the wells on the ranch went. Grace answered each question patiently, seeing in these eager young faces the continuation of her father's legacy and her own. Knowledge passed from generation to generation, each adding their own understanding to what had come before. It was a kind of immortality, she thought, to know that what she had learned and taught would continue long after she was gone. That night, lying in bed with Cole's arms around her, Grace reflected on the unexpected path her life had taken. She had thought, after her father died, that she would spend her years alone, fighting for recognition in a world that did not value what she knew. Instead, she had found love and partnership, had built a family and a legacy, had changed the way an entire valley understood and managed its most precious resource. "Are you happy, Grace?" Cole asked in the darkness, his voice soft against her hair. "More than I ever imagined possible," she replied honestly. "I have everything I ever wanted and so much more that I did not know to want. How did I get so lucky?" "Luck had nothing to do with it," Cole said. You earned every good thing in your life through your brilliance, your hard work, and your unwillingness to let others define your limits. I am just grateful you let me come along for the journey." "It would not have been nearly as wonderful without you," Grace said, turning in his arms to face him. Even in the darkness, she could feel the warmth of his gaze. "You were the missing piece I did not know I was looking for." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, as they had done every night for 3 decades, their breathing synchronizing in the intimate dance of long, married love. Outside, the valley slept under a blanket of stars, and beneath the earth, the water continued its eternal flow through channels and aquifers that Grace had mapped so precisely they would serve the region for 100 years and more. The seasons turned, bringing them to the autumn of 1908. Grace was 59 now, her dark hair almost completely silver, but her mind remained as sharp as ever. She had recently published her 3rd book, a comprehensive study of California water systems that was being used as a textbook in universities across the country. Cole was 64, moving a bit slower than he once had but still riding the ranch daily, and managing the business with the same shrewd intelligence he had always possessed. They sat together one evening on the porch, watching their youngest grandchild, a little girl named Grace after her grandmother, playing in the yard. The sight of her namesake made Grace's heart swell with emotion. "I never thought I would live to see my name carried on," she said softly. "I assumed that particular branch of the Thompson family would end with me." "You created your own branch," Cole pointed out. "A stronger one, built on love and partnership rather than just tradition. Our children and grandchildren carry your legacy, Grace, not just your name. They carry your values, your knowledge, your understanding that true worth comes from what you contribute, not from adhering to others' expectations." "We built something that will last," Grace agreed, watching young Grace chase butterflies across the lawn. "Not just the ranch, but a way of thinking about the land and about family. That matters more than any single well I ever found." As twilight deepened, their children began arriving for the weekly family dinner that had become tradition. Gerald came with his wife and their 4 children. Catherine arrived with her husband, a fellow veterinarian she had met during her studies. Thomas brought his wife and their 2 young sons. The house filled with noise and laughter. 3 generations gathered around the table Grace and Cole had commissioned when they first married, extended now with additional leaves to accommodate the growing family. During dinner, Gerald stood and raised his glass. "I want to propose a toast," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority his father possessed. "To my parents, who taught us that love means supporting each other's dreams rather than demanding sacrifice. To my mother, who showed me that knowledge is meant to be shared, and that understanding the land is the highest form of respect we can offer it. And to my father, who proved that a real man is secure enough to celebrate his wife's achievements rather than feel threatened by them. You have given us an incredible example to follow." Everyone raised their glasses, and Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks. Cole squeezed her hand under the table, his own eyes suspiciously bright. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile, Grace thought. Not the professional recognition or the money earned from consulting work, but this gathering of people they had created and raised and taught to value what truly mattered. After dinner, while the adults talked and the children played, Cole pulled Grace outside for a walk under the stars. They strolled hand in hand through the ranch yard, past the barn where they had shared their first kiss, past the original well that had proven Grace's abilities, out to the fence line where they could see the lights of San Jose twinkling in the distance. "I have been thinking," Cole said slowly, "about what comes next. I am 64 years old, Grace. I have lived a good life, better than I ever expected. But I find myself wanting to make sure everything is in place for when I am gone." "Do not talk like that," Grace protested, gripping his hand tighter. "You are healthy and strong. We have years ahead of us still." "I hope so," Cole said gently, "but I need you to know that I have updated my will. Everything is left to you, of course, but with provisions that recognize your right to continue your surveying work, to maintain your professional identity, to be more than just the widow of a rancher. I know how much your independence means to you, and I wanted to make sure no one could take that away after I am gone." Grace stopped walking and turned to face him, her heart aching with love for this man who understood her so completely. "Cole Harrison, you have been thinking about my future without you instead of simply assuming I would fade into the background as a proper widow should. You have never done anything proper in your entire life," Cole said with a smile. "Why would I expect you to start after I die? No, my love, I expect you to continue surveying and teaching and changing the world long after I am dust. And I wanted to make sure you had the financial means and legal authority to do exactly that. I do not want to think about a world without you in it," Grace said, her voice breaking slightly. "You have been my partner, my best friend, my great love for 35 years. I do not know how to be me without you. You were remarkable before you met me," Cole reminded her. "You will be remarkable after I am gone. But Grace, I hope that day is many years away. I plan to be a very old man, bouncing great-grandchildren on my knee and still arguing with you about the best locations for new wells." They held each other in the starlight, two people who had built a life so intertwined that the thought of separation was almost unbearable. But they both knew that mortality was inevitable, that the years they had left together were precious exactly because they were finite. "Promise me something," Grace said against his chest. "Promise me that we will make the most of whatever time we have. No regrets, no words left unsaid, no moments wasted on things that do not matter." "I promise," Cole said, kissing the top of her head. "And you promise me that if I go first, you will keep living fully. Keep working, keep teaching, keep being the extraordinary woman I fell in love with. Do not let grief turn you into a shadow of yourself." "I promise," Grace whispered, knowing that keeping that promise would be the hardest thing she ever did. But fate had other plans than either of them expected. It was Grace who fell ill first, in the winter of 1910. What started as a simple cold developed into pneumonia, and despite the best medical care available, her lungs were too damaged from years of breathing dust on survey sites. She lingered for 3 weeks, sometimes lucid and sometimes feverish, while Cole sat by her bedside and refused to leave. On a clear February morning, with her children and grandchildren gathered around and Cole holding her hand, Grace opened her eyes with sudden clarity. "The water," she said softly. "Can you hear it, Cole? The way it moves through the earth like music." "I hear it," Cole said, though whether he truly did or was simply offering her comfort, no one knew. "You taught me to listen, Grace. I will never stop listening." "Good," Grace said with a faint smile. "Someone needs to remember. Someone needs to keep the maps." Her eyes found each of her children in turn. "The knowledge is yours now. Use it wisely. Share it freely. The land will tell you what it needs if you listen." "We will, Mother," Gerald promised, his voice thick with tears. "We will honor everything you taught us." Grace's gaze returned to Cole, and her grip on his hand tightened with the last of her strength. "I love you," she said clearly. "From the first day to this last day, you have been my greatest adventure. Thank you for seeing me, for believing in me, for making me brave enough to be everything I was meant to be." "Grace," Cole said, and there was a world of love and grief in that single word. "You made my life meaningful. You took a grieving cowboy and taught him to see the beauty beneath the surface of things. I am who I became because of you. Partners, Grace whispered. Always partners. Always, Cole agreed. Grace closed her eyes with a peaceful expression, and moments later, she slipped away as gently as water flowing into earth. Cole held her hand for a long time after, unable to let go, unwilling to accept that the woman who had been the center of his world for 36 years was truly gone. They buried her on a rise overlooking the valley, with a view of the mountains in one direction and San Jose in the other. Her headstone was simple: Grace Thompson Harrison, 1849–1910. She knew the land and loved it well. But everyone in the valley knew it should have read so much more. She had been a surveyor, a teacher, a mother, a partner, and a woman who had changed the way an entire region understood its most precious resource. Cole was 66 when Grace died, and he lived another 15 years without her. He never remarried, never even considered it. Instead, he threw himself into preserving her legacy. He worked with the state to establish the Grace Thompson Harrison Water Conservation Institute, dedicated to teaching sustainable water management using the principles she had developed. He donated all her maps and notebooks to the University of California, ensuring that her knowledge would continue to educate future generations. He talked about her constantly, keeping her memory alive through stories of their work together, their adventures surveying the valley, the way she had changed his understanding of everything. His children and grandchildren learned to see these stories not as the ramblings of a grieving widower, but as precious gifts, the preservation of a love story that had defied convention and created something beautiful. Cole continued to manage the Harrison Ranch until his 81st year, finally stepping back only when his body simply could not keep up with the demands anymore. He moved into a small house on the property, built near the spot where Grace had found that first well, and spent his days watching the valley and listening to the land the way she had taught him. On a spring morning in 1925, Gerald found his father sitting peacefully in his chair on the porch, looking out at the valley with a slight smile on his face. Cole Harrison had passed away sometime during the night, and Gerald liked to think that Grace had come for him, that they were together again somewhere beyond the physical boundaries of the valley they had both loved so much. They buried Cole next to Grace on the rise, and his headstone read, Cole Harrison, 1844–1925. He honored the land and the woman who taught him to see it. The graves remained there for generations, becoming a landmark in the valley, a reminder of a partnership that had transformed an entire region. The Harrison Ranch continued to thrive under Gerald's management, and then his children's after him. The wells Grace had mapped still produced water a century after she had found them, testimony to the accuracy of her surveys and the sustainability of her management principles. The Grace Thompson Harrison Water Conservation Institute trained thousands of hydrologists, geologists, and surveyors, spreading her philosophy of careful stewardship across the American West. Catherine's veterinary practice grew into a network of clinics serving ranches throughout California, and Thomas's work in state water management helped establish policies that preserved resources for future generations. Each of them passed on to their own children the lessons they had learned from Grace and Cole about partnership, respect, and the importance of building a life based on shared values rather than rigid roles. Young Grace, the granddaughter who had been named after her grandmother, became a renowned hydrologist herself, publishing papers that expanded on her grandmother's work and adapting it to modern scientific understanding. She never met the woman she was named after, Grace having died when young Grace was just 4 years old. But she grew up saturated in stories about the legendary surveyor and the cowboy who had loved her. When young Grace was asked, late in her own life, what she thought was the most important lesson from her grandparents' story, she replied, "They showed that love is not about one person diminishing themselves so the other can shine. It is about two people bringing out the best in each other, supporting each other's gifts, and building something together that neither could have created alone." My grandmother mapped every water source in the San Jose Valley, and my grandfather said it was worth gold. But what they built together, that partnership based on respect and genuine admiration, that was worth infinitely more. The valley remembered them both, not just in the institute and the wells and the maps that still guided water management decisions a century later, but in the way people talked about what a good partnership should look like. Like Cole and Grace Harrison became shorthand in the region for a marriage of equals, for two people who made each other better simply by being together. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind moved through the valley just right, ranchers claimed they could hear voices on the breeze, a man and a woman talking about water sources and cattle rotation, and all the mundane details of a life shared, well, maybe that was just fancy. Or maybe it was the land itself remembering two people who had understood it so well, honoring their memory in the only way the earth knew how. The story of Grace Thompson Harrison and Cole Harrison became legend in California, taught in schools and referenced in textbooks on water management and Western history. But more than that, it became a template for how life could be lived differently, how rigid gender roles could be transcended without losing love or respect, how two people could build something lasting by honoring each other's strengths rather than trying to fit into society's predetermined molds. The valley prospered for generations on the water sources Grace had found and the management principles she had established. The ranch Cole had built continued to thrive, passing through 5 generations of Harrisons who all learned to listen to the land the way their legendary ancestors had. And on that rise overlooking San Jose, 2 graves stood side by side, marking the final resting place of a cowboy and a surveyor who had proven that true love was not about possession or tradition, but about partnership, respect, and the courage to build a life that honored both people's gifts equally. Their story ended not with separation but with reunion, not with loss but with legacy, not with regret but with the quiet satisfaction of lives fully lived and love completely expressed. Grace had mapped every water source in the valley from memory, and Cole had recognized its worth. But what they had found together was something far more precious than gold, a love that transformed them both and continued to inspire long after they had returned to the earth they had cherished so deeply.